a lot of people would look at me and kind of laugh because everybody had these big aspirations. Like, when I get out, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have this. And I'm like, nah, when I get out, I'm going to start over from scratch. I had to completely remove like a lot of my morals and values and the way I view life, and restructure my whole thinking pattern in the way that I view the world. I had to rebuild everything I knew because a lot of the beliefs and systems that I had set in place were destructive.
Welcome to the Path Forward podcast. It's presented by U-Turn Health and Second Opportunity. I'm your host, Augie Gillarducci, and if this is your first time joining us, thank you. I'd like to tell you what we're about. I was incarcerated for 13 years. I returned out of the halfway house in 2018, and I'm the president of a company called Second Opportunity. We provide reentry courses through tablets throughout the country inside jails and prisons, and we focus on things that lead to employment and things that lead to a more stable and more productive life. We also provide post-release support. So we answer the phone. The people in our organization, most of them have the experience of incarceration. We'll help with employment, we'll help with transitional housing, we'll help with some of the social services that are necessary for us to reintegrate. And the purpose of the podcast is to bring inspiration and information. And so I interview a lot of people who have been incarcerated, have gotten out, and are doing amazing things with their life. And then we also bring in people that, for example, that have educational programs or training programs that raise awareness of what's available on the outside that we wouldn't know about on the inside. So most of the time, the way that we do this, my guest is sitting right next to me at a table and we're looking into the same camera. But we're not able to do that today because my guest is coming to us from Alaska. And so what we're going to do is talk with somebody that I actually met in the federal prison in Duluth. I think we got to know each other pretty well over a few years there. And I follow the work he's doing and the great things that he's doing on Facebook. But I want to introduce Sean Sullivan. Sean, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time out of your day. And we're actually doing this on a Saturday morning. So I know that you've got plenty of other things to do.
Thank you, man. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, man. You were definitely one of my good friends when we were in Duluth. We went through some pretty trying experiences there and learned a lot. Basically, my name's Sean Sullivan, born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. Like I was telling Mr. Gillarducci earlier, my love and my passion originally growing up here in Alaska was sports. I participated in sports, but my real passion was music. I grew up very fluently in the church. My parents were ministers, so my mom would always have me at the church, and I'd be playing around on the instruments, learning piano, drums, and things of that nature. And as I got older, I followed that path in music, and I began to produce music and create music and put it out. And I was pretty successful on the underground scene of doing music here in Alaska. But yeah, that's pretty much my background. My parents, very hard workers, and I just made some decisions when I came to that fork in the road at a certain age where I traveled, down a path that was less uncertain. And it ended up landing me in federal prison. So that's kind of like a gist of how everything came together, if I was to sum it up.
And so Sean, what year did you release?
I got out in 2015, I think.
Okay, a little bit before me. And did you release back to Alaska?
Yes, I did. I came back to Anchorage.
A little halfway house time when you got there, and then
Yeah, they threw me in the halfway house for, you know, a small amount of time. I wasn't in there that long, but I got out of there pretty quick.
So I'd like to talk about, I'm sure there are people in this audience that are, when you said produce music, that their ears perked up. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit, and it's something I don't know much about. So just kind of share with us that path to that either you took in the beginning, and I believe you've been producing some music since you've been out as well. So how is it that you got into producing music, and how did you learn that skill to be able to produce music and that type of thing?
Well, in the music industry, a lot of people know me as Joker the Bail Bondsman, and I think a lot of it started in my teenage years, probably when I was maybe 14 or 15. I had a lot of older friends that were doing music and that were somewhat successful locally doing it, and I would they would have music equipment, and I would go over in the studio and I would play with the music instruments, and I was really intrigued and wanted to get into the production side of things. So I had ended up asking my mom to buy me a keyboard. Um, and her and my dad was like, okay, you know what, this might be a good investment for us to kind of help you keep your head straight and out of a bunch of negative things. So they purchased me a keyboard, and I'm thankful for that. I still have it today. This is back when I'm like 14, 15 years old. And that's what kind of like introduced me to sequencing and programming music. And I'm really glad that they did that for me because it kept me out of a lot of stuff where I could have been involved in more things in the streets, but I was so infatuated with my keyboard and learning how to produce and make music. I think that was probably one of the stepping stones for me to flourish into the artist that I had became as a producer. So that was really, really a big step in my life is my parents purchasing me some music equipment because, yeah, it didn't keep me all the way out the streets, but if it wasn't for that, my demise would have probably been way worse and way sooner.
So I want to share with those that are watching this that Sean was my go-to guy. I was exposed, based on, I mean, my music is from the 70s and early 80s. So I was exposed to a lot of different music when I was away. And whenever I heard something and had no idea who it was, Sean's the guy I would find. And I would say, hey, who is this? And he would always tell me who it was and what the name of the tune was. And we actually had, if you remember, Sean, we had those little MP3s, and so I'd write down what you told me, and then I'd go to the MP3 and I'd download that particular song. And actually, a lot of that stuff I still have on my phone now that I use that. I mean, I've built out my playlist with a lot of the stuff that you taught me about. So I do remember that. So upon leaving the halfway house or returning back and integrating back in, was your first step to get back into the music production scene, or is there something that you did in it before that?
I did when I got out. I was still heavily influenced by music, and that was I got out and I wanted to still produce and still rap and do music, but it didn't take long for me to realize how much the culture changed, how much I had changed, and how much I had learned from being in prison. So my mindset and my views and my paradigms of the way I viewed the world and just my life and everything had changed so much. Um, I backed away from the music. I just didn't have the same passion and love for it as I did previously because I don't know. It was just, music evolves and it changes so much. I was a little bit more trying to focus on the business aspects of things. Like I said, I've gotten a lot older. I know, there's really no age limit on music, but for me, I feel like it's a young man's sport, and sometimes you just gotta, you know, figure out what works best for you. And I was at a point in my life where I was trying to financially figure things out because I came home with nothing, and music just didn't pay any bills. Like it doesn't. It's not. You being in the music industry, especially today, is not really lucrative financially, um, unless you're an A-list or B-list celebrity. So um, I was just working to trying to venture out other things and figure out what my calling was and where my place was in life.
And so this, are we talking now like 2016, 17?
Yeah, and we're talking about like as immediately as soon as I got out. But I think one of the things with me is when I went to prison and I came home, I had a plan, and when I came home, it was a structured plan, and I executed my plan when I came home. And when I did that, things began to fall into place and into alignment. So even when we were in the RDAP program, and we would have those meetings, every morning, and they would say, Sean, what are you gonna do when you get out? At the time, my significant other was working at a restaurant, and I came home to a strong support system. So let me say that though, I came home, I had a really, I had a strong woman, a strong background. My family was there, so I had a nice support system, and that's really important when you come home is having that structure. So when we were in groups, I would say, hey man, when I get home, I'm gonna flip burgers and I'm gonna work at a gym until I figure out my path. And a lot of people would look at me and kind of laugh because everybody had these big aspirations. Like when I get out, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have this. And I'm like, nah, when I get out, I'm going to start over from scratch. I had to completely remove like a lot of my morals and values and the way I view life, and restructure my whole thinking pattern in the way that I view the world. I had to rebuild everything I knew because a lot of the beliefs in systems that I had set in place were destructive and would lead me back down to the wrong path. So when I came home, I was flipping burgers, I was working in the gym, and I was just looking for an opportunity to figure out what I wanted to do. I was lost, and I think to circumvent that, I was working a lot. I was working like two or three jobs at once to occupy my time and my mind because I didn't really trust myself. I didn't want to fall back into that same rut that I was because I seen the repetitious pattern when I was in prison. Because to me, I wasn't actually in prison. I was in a learning institute. That's how I really looked at it because I learned a lot from prison. And I'm not just saying that to be stereotypical, but it was a time of self reflection. I stopped drinking. I stopped doing drugs. I really wanted to see what was plaguing my people as a young black man. And I really studied us as a whole while I was in prison. And I was just really disgusted with our thinking patterns and a lot of the errors that we have in our life. And what I've learned from this situation is that a lot of my people in the prison like are severely mentally ill, and a lot of it has been mistreated or hasn't been treated. And we have a lot of mental illnesses within our community as young black men. And it's not necessarily mental illnesses as, you know, disabilities, but I think it's more so thinking errors of the way that we've been raised in the culture and the music. A lot of it puts us into a box and puts us on a one-way path to destruction, and we believe that. And there's a lot of stuff that we're willing to die for and react to that's really not worth the reactions or death that has come upon us.
So I wanted to go back on one of the things actually two things that you said. So you talked about on the inside you were planning and changing your thinking patterns. Do you feel that prison gave you the opportunity to do that? In other words, had you not been incarcerated, would you have had the same amount of time to reflect and to think about what you want your future to look like?
No, if I didn't go to prison, I would have been dead. And for a lot of reasons, I would have never stopped the path that I was on. I didn't feel the need to. I would have continued to sell drugs for until my demise. And my health wise, I was in really I was in really bad health, and I didn't realize how significant and important your health is. I had untreated high blood pressure. Um, I was way overweight, and in prison it's a little bit harder to have those gluttonous ways because your eating and stuff is minimized, and so it was a lot of I was really upset with God when he had put me in that situation. I felt like he had let me down. But in retrospect, he was really preserving me for a bigger and better path that was much more that had more value and consistency of than what I wanted to do personally. Because all I am right now is a vessel, and I'm comfortable with that. I've grown into not feeling like I need to be in the spotlight. Um, I've grown up to feeling like I don't need to be a superstar or successful. Only thing I just want to do is I just don't want to have a boss. I just want to be content, travel, and God's blessed me and put me in a position today where I've been extremely successful in probably a field that nobody thinks you can be successful in, working with homelessness, and I'm just honored and privileged that the Lord is still using me as a vessel and still feels that I could be used for a greater path.
Well, I mean, I'm really interested to hear how you got on the path that you're on, and the work that you're doing. So, will you take a few minutes and really explain? So, you got out. You were talking. I was flipping burgers. I was working in the gym. I was working 2, 3 jobs to stay busy, figure out what my path was going to be. So, what did your path turn out to be? How did you get on there, and what have you learned from it, and what can you share with the men and women on the inside as far as how it's impacted the way that you live your life?
Um, so when I got out, I was working what people some may consider low end jobs, grocery stores. I was putting groceries on shelves, and a friend of me, and I just want to say this: what's strange about my career is a lot of my elevation, and every time I took a step up, it was always a female that gave me an opportunity, and it's just strange. It's because it's been all females that was like, Sean, I'm gonna give you a shot, and I've taken those opportunities and elevated. I have a friend of mine named Jasmine. Um, she reached out to me and seeing I was trying to do what was right and on the right path, and she was like, and at the time I was currently on federal probation. She was like, why don't you get a job down at the homeless shelter? And at first it was just kind of like, what? Because I was still riding that ego and coattail of a musician when I got out. So I'm like, nah, I don't want to work at a shelter because I had a misconception and perception about homeless people. And one day I was just sitting at home and I was thinking to myself, like, if I worked at that shelter, I was like, man, my probation officer would love that. That would just really show that humility. That's what it would show. That's the word we would always use in treatment. I said working at a homeless shelter would show a tremendous amount of humility because nobody really wants to indulge with the work with homeless people. So, long story short, I ended up getting hired from another female who's been a huge inspiration in my career. Her name is Sean Hayes. She's doing big things right now. Like she's elevated so high. So that was one of my mentors. And she was like, yo, I like your energy. I'm gonna give you a job here down at the shelter. And from there it just went up. Like I kept getting jobs in that same exact field. I moved over to another agency named Rule Cap, which gave me a huge opportunity. It taught me a lot about homelessness and training and mental health. And I learned a lot about housing. And I just ended up staying in that lane, and I would apply for more jobs in that field. So I was getting a lot of the education. My bosses were grooming me, so I was going to meetings. I was just learning and learning everything about homeless, and I wanted to be real successful at what I was doing, and I was making really good money too. So, I mean, it wasn't like the drug money, but it was enough money for me to be able to sustain a comfortable lifestyle and do what I wanted to do. So when I was working all these 2 and 3 jobs, there was a void in the housing sector where I have to for me to house people, because that's what I did with street outreach. I was going out into the woods and helping homeless people get signed up for IDs, housing, and a lot of the technical things that they needed. I was providing those resources, and there was a void and like a lot of bureaucracy for me. I don't know if I said that right, but for me to house some of these individuals, they were making it real difficult, and the decision makers that were the ones housing people weren't on the front lines and didn't really know what was going on, and a lot of the information that they were getting and was coming from us on the streets. So when I would try to house these individuals, they wouldn't necessarily stop me, but they would block me, and there would be a lot of gridlock. And I was like, man, you know what? I need to start buying my own properties and housing these individuals in this exact same system. So what ended up happening is my loan officer, her name's Lisa McConey, somebody I grew up with when I was a child. She seen what I was doing, and I was like, man, you know what? I want to buy a rental property. And at the time, I was working hard, man. I was working like 3 jobs, getting no sleep, just really, really in search of what my destination was going to be. And she was like, yo, if you work the same job for 2 years, save up this amount of money, I'll get you into a fourplex. And I was like, man, no way. Like, they're not giving black men like me no fourplexes. And I don't care how hard I work. I was real pessimistic about it. And, but I said, you know what? I hadn't taken any back steps. I was doing everything right. Um, I said, I'm going to give it a shot, man. I'm going to work my ass off, do what she said, save up my money, work at the same job for 2 years, and see if this really works. If it really works, then, then I might be on to something. And, she kept her word. I worked the same job for 2 years, saved up the amount of money she told me to save, but it was rough. We were having a real hard struggle, and there was a lot of roadblocks, and I was ready to give up so many times. And I'm just like, man, fuck this. Like, I don't, you keep giving me these terms and extra. She was like, nah, Sean, I'm not going to let you give up. Like, I'm going to just keep doing this, do that, you know, and I'm going to get you into the building. And she did. She actually got me into my first fourplex. And it was ironic because the building was completely empty. So none of the units had been filled, and it was completely renovated. So it was like brand new everything. The doorknobs, like you walk in there, and it was just really captivating for me to be able to walk into an empty fourplex, completely renovated, brand new carpet, brand new paint, brand new smell. And I would just sit in there and go to each apartment and just sit on the floor and just revel in it. Like, wow, like I came from the feds. I've only been out this amount of time, and I already have my own fourplex, and it became an addiction. So my next property was when I was out actually doing street outreach. I found a homeless individual sleeping in the car in the front of an abandoned building. And I would go out there because his name was on this list. We would get these lists, and we have to go out and try to look for these people and try to help them. So he was sleeping in his car, and I'm talking to him like, yo, what's going on with this building right here? He was like, it's abandoned. We usually just break in there and do drugs. He was like, I don't really know much about it. It's just kind of like where I squat and sleep in this car in front of this building. So I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy this building. I said, I'm going to find out who owns it, get the right information, and I'm going to buy it. And it was a long shot, but I planted the seed verbally so that the universe would align itself to put me in a position to be able to own that property. Because affirmations and speaking things into existence is very, very, very true. Um, I had a hard time getting the building. First of all, I couldn't find out who owned it. It was trashed. It was in really, really bad shape. But I reached out. Someone told me, Lisa's like, yo, call this lady Amy Bacon. She's really good. She'll be able to find out who owns it. She'll be able to get you in the right direction. So after strenuous research, and I couldn't find out anything on this building, I ended up hiring Amy, and she calls me like, okay, this is the owner. This is her information. And so I got overzealous. I'm like, oh my God, you found out who owns it? Like, let's figure out what's going on with it. So the building had been abandoned for like almost 5-7 years. And the owners had owned a ton of back taxes on it, a lot of taxes. And I had been working hard, so I saved up a lot of money. So I said, listen, tell them I will pay off all the taxes as well as give them another. I think I offered them maybe like 20 grand. I can't remember the exact amount, but for me, it was a fair chunk of change. I said, I'll pay off the tax because the taxes were a lot. I think the taxes alone were like 20 something grand. So I was like, I'll pay off the taxes and then I'll give them another um, nice chunk of change if they let me get the building. And the owners were like, hell yeah, you're going to pay off the taxes and give us and the blessing for this is they finance me. So I didn't have to go to a bank for that. It was like, yo, listen, we'll finance you. Give us this, 15, I can't remember the exact amount. It's like 1,500 a month or something like that. Um, I just told them, listen, carry the note for me for like 1 year. Give me a little bit of time financing it. Then I'll go to a bank and have them cash you out. They were like, cool, let's do it. So that was one of the obstacles. But the other obstacle is the building was in pretty bad shape. All of the units needed to be remodeled. It was a triplex. It was a triplex. So when I called up all my friends and I got the building. So I'm like, I would bring my friends over that work with me in homeless services and they would just come in and we would look at the building. And like I said, once again, I'd go in there and I would revel because it was dusty. It was like aged and they were just looking at me like, this is not going to work, Sean. Like, this shit is trash. Like, where are you going to get the money to fix this up? And I'm like, dude, I'm working 3 and 4 jobs at once. I'll invest all my fucking money in this shit. I don't care. I'll leave myself with $0 because I'm a visionary. I know I can see things that aren't there. And at the same time, I was a housing specialist. So I wasn't concerned about the rent or how the rent would get paid because by this time, I learned about all the subsidies. I knew all the agencies that had money and that wanted to house people pretty much at any cost because there's individuals in the communities that have been through so much trauma that no landlord would house them. So I knew that I could use that to my advantage and never have an empty unit because I know where the money's at. They give pools of money to these agencies and you can go directly to these agencies and they're going to be like, oh, you'll house my clients? Hell yeah, but I'm going to charge you. It's going to be it's going to be a little bit more. So what I ended up doing with that property is it was a triplex and each apartment had 3 bedrooms as I rented out each room separate bedroom for $1,100 and I ran a program that was no drugs or alcohol, no visitors, and it blew up. I had one floor that was all females, and the other two ones were all units. So you can pretty much do the math on that right there. And like I said, I had a couple construction workers that were willing to work with me, and every time I made a little nice chunk of change from work, I would dump it into the property. It was really a tough struggle for me. And I had one investor that put some money to me into my one of my situation. His name was Bub, and I'm very uh, grateful for him to be able to help me because he gave me an extra little. I didn't have it all together, and he seen what I was doing, kind of like how you're doing. He was like, Sean, I see what you're doing. I want to help you. And I'm like, what? And he just came in and was like, yo, I can't give you enough money to fix up the whole building, but I'll give you enough to repair one of the units fully. And he helped fund me for that. And I paid him back. Um, but that really helped me. And from there, it was just, man, it was just smooth selling. I had that addiction now to say, you know what? This is my calling to find these vacant and abandoned properties and refurbish them and transition them into housing for those that need it. And I took it all the way to the assembly, and they kind of took my idea because I kept going in there and I'm like, yo, you guys need to invest in me because I'm the future of this shit. I know what I'm doing. I've got the blood, sweat, tears. I got my 10,000 master hours in on this. So guys, listen to me. Stop listening to the people behind the desk with all of the collegiate degrees and listen to me out here on the front line in 10 below weather. Like you need to be, and they're just looking at me kind of like, and I got a few small grants, but it turned into big assembly meetings. Now we're like, hey man, we should take all these vacant abandoned properties and use them for the homeless. And I'm sitting there and like, gosh, this is my, you took my vision and my idea and you brought it to the forefront. But it's neither here nor there because there's enough money in buildings out here for everybody. But and it's just been a blessing. And I learned that when I stayed on that straight and narrow and came home and I didn't diverge back to my old lifestyle, just God just kept continuing to bless me, man. I made so much money. Like it, it it's um it, it's more money and more success than I did when I was selling drugs, and that's what's amazing because the money's different.
I knew this would be a good conversation, but I had no idea how good it would actually be. I think your story for because I think it's fair to say that when you were sitting on the inside thinking about what your life would look like when you got out, probably wasn't running through your head. I'm going to be refurbishing buildings to house the homeless.
Never, I would have laughed.
So what's great about what you're doing, from my view, is that not only are you doing things that are profitable for you and give you purpose, but you're serving a fundamental need for people to have stable housing. They call it the economic empowerment model, that you can't have a stable job if you don't have stable housing. And housing, as you know, as anybody that watches this knows or will know, housing for somebody that has a background is a very challenging thing that to go through. And so to know somebody like you who's been through that, who knows that world, now you know the housing world. I think this has been a terrific conversation. I so much appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I'll give you a minute here and just let you address the men and women on the inside and just tell them what you want them to know, that to maybe inspire or give them some hope, or to let them know that it can get much better. And you said it yourself, what you're doing now is better than it was when you were making a lot of money doing things that landed you there in the first place.
To the people on the inside, I would say, being in prison is the time that you have there. And this is probably one of the most encouraging and wisest things I can tell them that help me is you have a block of time that people out in the streets and in the real world don't have. You have to utilize every second of every day in prison, educating yourself to put yourself miles and miles and miles ahead of individuals when you get out. Um, I learned how to play guitar when I was in there. Prison is time management. There's so much time that you have to yourself. For me, for if you're in the prison system and you like helping people, and the funny thing is, I wasn't really interested in really helping a lot of people, but with that experience, you can come home and work in this field and put yourself in a position to be successful. Case managers, peer support. There's a lot of financial things that can be sustainable when you get out of prison. So I would say learn everything you can. And I know this sounds so cliche, but take time to learn what you can in prison that you won't have time to take advantage of if you were home. Because when you're in the real world, you got baby mamas, you got jobs, you got a lot of stuff that hinders you from focusing and really channeling in on what it is that you can do. So for me, my thing was just learn everything I can in prison, anything that'll be beneficial. I didn't know how to type, so I was in the education learning how to type. So when I came home and I'm going to these jobs, I can type 70, 80 words a minute. And a lot of these are small little attributes that I gained in prison that can go a long way when you get out here. And I would just say master being communications and de-escalating. You got to learn how to talk to people and walk into a room and be able to have a structured conversation and make the room glow and make people interested in you. Learn everything you can. Anything that you can learn in prison that they're going to teach you for free that would be beneficial when you get out, take full advantage of it. And you'll be all right. You'll definitely be all right.
Sean, I want to thank you. Thanks for your time. Your story's great. I hope that those that have watched this episode really enjoyed the sincerity of what you had to say and what your message is. And those on the inside, please, if you know others, let them know to tune into the Path Forward podcast. And this has been a great episode with Sean Sullivan. Let your family know on the outside that this is one worth watching. And Sean, again, thank you. And we'll do a better job keeping in more regular contact from this point forward. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Path Forward podcast. Before you go, we'd like to hear from you. Please feel free to send us your questions or topics you'd like to hear on a future episode at P.O. Box 3411, Peachtree City, Georgia, 30269. It may end up that your question will be a featured episode. Until then, keep your head down and keep moving for the door.